Hi, I'm Scott, and I want to spend some time showing you how to set up a Python development environment on a Windows PC so you can jump right into learning the Python language. Python is a popular programming language these days. It's used in many different fields, including in AI and machine learning, though it also has a long history in data science, in tool building, and in general software development. Python is pretty approachable, both for people who are new to programming and for people who already have programming experience in other languages. So it's useful to know how to use Python if you work with data or build software, or if you'd like to get started working with the powerful tools that Python provides us. While learning the Python language is often fairly straightforward, especially at the beginning, getting a computer set up to work with Python can be a little tricky, especially if you're new to programming. So I'd like to spend some time to show you how to set up your computer to work with Python. I have 4 primary goals for this video. First, I'll show you how to make sure a Python interpreter and Python's very helpful standard library are installed on your computer. The Python interpreter is what allows our computer to run Python code, and the Python standard library is a collection of really helpful functions, features, libraries, and other tools that will let us write powerful and useful programs that can run anywhere Python is installed. Second, we'll install and briefly explore Visual Studio Code, which is a software development program we can use to write our Python code. We can also use it to tell the Python interpreter to run our Python code. I'll show you how to install Visual Studio Code extensions to make it easier to work with Python as well. Third, I'll introduce you to virtual environments, which give us a way to create a separate, reproducible environment to run our Python code, or to run other people's Python code. Using a separate, dedicated environment is critical to working with Python outside of very basic tasks, and it's good to get in the habit of using virtual environments all the time. The fourth topic that I want to cover in this video is a quick look at using Jupyter Notebooks within Visual Studio Code. Interactive examples and lab notes are often shared as Jupyter Notebooks, so it's a good idea to be at least a little bit familiar with them before starting to use them as course materials or tutorials. As we'll see, the ability to use these notebooks relies on some other things that we'll be setting up along the way. There are many different places we might run Python, including in online notebooks, or on servers, or in containers, or things like that. But this video is going to focus on making sure we're set up to use Python directly on our local system. So let's get started with task number 1, installing Python on our system. We can't use Python if we don't have Python after all. We'll start out by visiting python.org in a web browser. Here, I'll find the Downloads area and click the button to download the Python Install Manager. Once that's done, I can find that in my Downloads directory. Here it is. I'll double-click it to open it. Once that opens up, I'll click Install Python. In the window that opens up, I'm asked a few questions. I'll answer yes to this one, and then I'll click Yes. Next, I'm asked to add the commands directory to my path, and again, I'll answer yes. I'll move this window up so I can see what's next. I'm asked to install CPython, and I'll also say yes. Then the software will install the current version of Python, which for me is 3.14.6. If you have a different version, don't worry. When that's done, I'm asked if I want to view the online help, and here I'll say no. Okay, Python's installed. We could repeat this installation process when a new version of Python is released, though it's not necessary to constantly stay up to date with every new minor release of Python. I'd like to briefly direct your attention back to the python.org webpage that we were just visiting, and to the Documentation tab right here. There's a lot of helpful resources that I encourage you to explore. One of these resources is the Python documentation, or Python docs, where you can find a description of every feature and module of the Python standard library. As you're learning Python, this will be a very valuable resource. It even includes a tutorial in case you're learning Python on your own. We can write Python code in many different places, though to get started as we're learning, it's helpful to use a software development tool that allows us to write, check, and run our code all in the same place. Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, is a software development tool that's available for free, and it can run on Windows, on Macs, and on Linux. So let's take a look at installing it here on Windows. First, I'll open up code.visualstudio.com in my browser, and then I'll find the download button here. I'll click that, and the installer will start downloading. Once it's done downloading, I'll find the installer, and I'll double-click it to open it up. I'll accept the license agreement, and I'll click Next to move forward. There's nothing we really need to change here, so I'll just keep clicking Next until the software is installed. Now Visual Studio Code is installed. With this box checked here, it'll open up Visual Studio Code when I click Finish, but we could also find Visual Studio Code in the Start menu or find it by searching. When the software opens, I'm given the opportunity to sign in with GitHub, but I'll click Continue without signing in instead. Then I'm presented with some choices for customization. I'll click Light 2026, and I'll click Continue. Then I'll click Get Started. Now I see a welcome screen that asks us to open up a folder where we'll be working. If you don't see this welcome screen, you can open up a folder by going up here to File, and then choosing Open Folder, and then navigating to whatever folder you plan to work in. This is where I'll set where I want to keep my Python working files. This location can be anywhere, and you can create a new directory or you can use an existing one. I'd recommend avoiding putting your working directory in a location that syncs to the cloud, because that can lead to some issues if the syncing gets confused or something like that. It's usually fine, but it can lead to some strange and hard to troubleshoot problems in some cases. Personally, I'll create my Python work directory right here inside my home directory. I'll right-click and choose New, and then click Folder. I'll call this Python Work. Okay, once I select that, I'll be asked whether I trust the authors of the files in this folder. My folder is empty right now, but what this is really asking is whether VS Code should treat the files as potentially dangerous or not. We'll be creating our own files here, so I'm going to click Yes, I trust the authors. Now I have a workspace, and let's spend a moment to explore it. I can zoom in with Ctrl, Shift, and plus. And I'll rearrange things just a little bit. Here on the right side, I see my AI chat bar, and while that can be very useful, we won't be focusing on it here. I'll close that by clicking the little X up here in the top right. If I want to bring that back, I can go up to the View menu item and choose Chat. On the far left side of the screen, I have some icons that change which view of the application I'm seeing. The one that's selected here is Explorer, and that's this panel here where I'll be able to see my workspace folder and any files and folders within that. The next view is Search, where I can find and also replace text within my workspace. After that is Source Control, which is where we'd work with commits or changes if we're using Git for source control. I'm not going to be using that here, but you might if you start collaborating on a project with others. Below that is the Run and Debug view, which allows us to do some useful troubleshooting of our code if we're looking for problems. And below that is the Extensions view, which is where we'd find and control extensions, which are plugins that add features and capabilities to Visual Studio Code. We'll see more about that in a moment. I'll click back on Explorer. To get started working with Python, I'll create a Python file. To do that, I can either right-click in this area and choose New File, or I can find the New File icon here in Explorer. I'll name this file working.py and press Enter. The .py file extension will tell VS Code that this is a Python file, and VS Code will offer to install the Python extension if it isn't already installed. So I'll click Install. The Python extension allows VS Code to provide syntax highlighting, which provides different colors for different parts of the language, as we'll see when we start to dive into the Python language itself. The extension also provides a linter, which checks the correctness of our code and can suggest fixes when something isn't written properly. It also provides IntelliSense for Python, which surfaces notes and documentation about how various Python commands and features work as we type them. And there are a number of other useful features it provides as well. We can manage the extensions in that extensions view that I showed you earlier. Here's the Python extension, and if your VS Code didn't automatically install it, you can search for Python up here in the search box and install it manually. I'll switch back to my Explorer view, and I'll close some of these windows. With my new Python file selected, I see its contents here in this tab. It's empty right now, but let's write a very basic Python program to see how things are working. I'll write print, opening parenthesis, and hello in double quotes. And as I do, I can start to see the code assistance features of the Python extension showing me some information and trying to help me out. It's useful to explore these while you're learning, but they can start to get a little bit annoying too, and they can be turned off in the settings under the name Parameter Hints. Once I've finished typing my program, I'll save my changes with Ctrl+S or by going into the File menu and pressing Save. VS Code knows that this is a Python program, and I can see that by this indicator down here in the bottom that says Python. I could click this and change the mode to another language, or I could use this to select Python if for some reason VS Code didn't already pick up on the fact that we're trying to use Python here. We need to make sure that if we run our program, we're using the version of Python we installed. Here in the bottom right, I can choose which interpreter I'm using. This is the version of Python that I installed, and it's the recommended one, so I'll keep using that one. And then I'll find the little play button up here in the top right. I'll click that and it'll run my code. I see a new panel open up down here called Terminal. What's happening here is that Visual Studio Code is passing my Python program, which has this path right here, over to the Python interpreter that we told it to use. That's this path here. The interpreter runs our Python script, and then we see the output of the program, which in this case is hello, printed out here at the console. As you learn Python, you'll find out how to make more interesting programs, but we've just written and run a perfectly functional, if rather boring, Python program. We can close this terminal window to get some of our screen space back, and it'll pop back up if we run the program again using that play button icon. Or we can bring the terminal back by going up to the View menu and choosing Terminal. Visual Studio Code has a lot of features, and we won't be looking at many more of them here. But if you'd like to explore, you can press Ctrl-Shift-P and open up the command palette, where you can search for and find features to run. The third major thing that I want to show you here is how to set up and use a Python virtual environment. Virtual environments act like little individual, separate spaces for our projects, and they're used to keep the Python environments for each of our programs or projects from interfering with each other. When we're getting started with Python, it can be hard to see the benefits of using virtual environments, because they tend to become much more useful once we start adding on third-party modules and things like that. But it's good to get into the habit of using them, and it's important to understand what they are and how they work. While the Python standard library contains a huge amount of useful modules, we'll also sometimes need to use modules from third parties. We'll find these on PyPy, the Python package index, and we'll download them to our system with pip, the Python package manager. One problem we might face, though, is that when modules are downloaded, they're installed within the scope of whatever Python installation we happen to be using. We want to make sure to leave the system Python alone, and it's not a great idea to be adding random packages that one of our programs might use to the installation of Python that another of our programs might use. If we install packages or modules while a virtual environment is active, those packages or modules are installed into a directory in the virtual environment, instead of into the Python installation that we're using. And we can easily create a list of the requirements for a particular program's environment so it can be reproduced later. The process of using a virtual environment looks like this. First, we create a virtual environment for our project either in the terminal or command line, or by using a tool like Visual Studio Code. This creates a directory, usually a hidden directory called .venv, which contains a configuration file and some other scripts. Next, we'll activate the virtual environment so we're working within it. Again, this can be done manually at the command line by using the activate script that's generated for us, or it can be done through a software development tool that we're using. Then when we install new packages, they'll be installed into this virtual environment instead of into the global Python for the whole system. We can also deactivate the environment when we're done using it. Here in the bottom right of the window, where I see the Python environment that I'm using, I'll click and open up this Python selection menu. Up at the top of this list is an option to create a virtual environment, so I'll click that. Here I'll use the Quick Create option, which will create a virtual environment in my workspace. Once that's been created, Visual Studio Code asks if I want to use this for the workspace folder, and I'll click Yes. Creating a virtual environment created this directory here called .venv. That's where the configuration is, and where modules will be installed if we need to install modules. Notice down here that now my Python environment selector has the version number and also .venv in parentheses. That indicates that we're using this virtual environment. If I run my program again, we're still not working inside that virtual environment, so I'll get rid of this terminal, and then I'll run my script again. After that runs, I can see .venv in parentheses here, and now anything that I run will run inside my virtual environment. So I'll run my script again, And here's the output, running within the context of my virtual environment. If you don't see the venv entry here, you can delete old terminals and close this panel and run the program again, and it should pick up the virtual environment automatically. If you open up another working directory, VS Code should also pick up the virtual environment from that directory automatically if it has one. As I mentioned, using a virtual environment right when we're getting started with Python doesn't bring us any immediate benefits, but it's important to get in the habit of using them so we don't face a hurdle later on. While we'll usually work with Python code as a text file within a code editor, as we've been doing so far, it's also common to work with Python using Jupyter Notebooks, which provide a more interactive interface for working with code. Jupyter Notebooks are files with the extension IPyNB, which is short for Interactive Python Notebook. Jupyter Notebooks are often used in education because they allow us to have some useful text combined with code blocks that can be run individually. They're also commonly used as a way to demonstrate a step-by-step process or sketch out a code prototype. And the Jupyter Notebook interface is frequently used within teams to provide a shared environment where collaborators can work together on the same code. So I can create a notebook file by just including that extension in the name. I'll click my New File icon, and then I'll create working.ipynb. VS Code knows a little bit about notebooks thanks to software included in the Python extension, but we'll need to install some more software as we go. To run a notebook, I'll need to provide a kernel, and that's where we'll set which Python to use. I'll click on Select Kernel up here in the upper right of the window. I'll install the suggested extensions. Then in this drop-down here, I'll choose Python Environments, and I'll make sure to select the virtual environment for this workspace. A Jupyter Notebook can contain text or markdown cells and code cells. I'll make a very basic code cell here, with the same program we saw earlier. That's print, opening parenthesis, and hello in double quotes, and then a closing parenthesis. I'll save this with Ctrl S. To run this code, I'll click the little play button up in the upper left of the cell. When I do this, I'm asked to install the IPy kernel package, and that's some of the software I'll need to run notebooks. So I'll click Install, and this process will take just a moment. Once that's installed, I'll stop this. I'll restart Jupyter, and I'll run my code cell again. When I do, I'll see the output of my program right here underneath the cell. We can also open up notebooks from other sources and run them on our system. I have an example notebook here in my Downloads directory, and I can add that right to my workspace here by dragging it from the Downloads area into this area of VS Code, or I could add it to my workspace directory in the File Explorer, and it would show up here as well. Here in this notebook, I can see some of those text-based markdown cells that I mentioned. These are often used to share text information. And there are also code cells, where our little pieces of code live. I'll click play to run this cell, and I'll need to connect this notebook to my virtual environment and the Jupyter kernel. So I'll pick my virtual environment, and then I see the output of this cell. I'll scroll down, I'll run this cell, and again I see its output here. I'll scroll down a little bit. Jupyter Notebooks are interactive, so we can prompt the user for some input. I'll run this cell, which asks for a name, and I'll add the name Charlie here. I'll press Enter, and this cell runs the code within it, and gives me a response. I'll run the cell again and provide different input. And in this case, the program outputs different information in response to that. These notebooks are modular, so we can define things in one cell and use them in a later cell. That's often used to create a step-by-step process where we do some setup or initial calculations or something, and then in a later cell we iterate on something or focus on something specific that we can run over and over without having to rerun all the code before it. I encourage you to explore this example file on your own time. While we usually won't use Jupyter Notebooks to build or distribute software or tools, we'll often use them for collaborating around smaller pieces of code, and we'll often see them in documentation and tutorials. While you're learning, it's common to use both regular script files and notebooks for different tasks. Okay, now you should be set up to start learning the Python language. We've followed a lot of steps, but now we have a learning environment all ready to go. We've installed Python, and we've installed and explored Visual Studio Code. We've seen how to create and use virtual environments, and we've explored why they're so important in modern Python development. We've also taken a brief look at how to use Jupyter Notebooks within Visual Studio Code. If you're planning to attend my Python course through Stanford Continuing Studies, I'll see you there. And if you're learning Python using other resources, keep the documentation at docs.python.org in mind, and have fun.